Hello, and thank you very much for attending the Environment and Climate Change Scrutiny panel, if I can say it. So I'd like to just introduce myself as the lead member for this committee. I'm Councillor Jackie Ramsey, and I'll just introduce the panel first, if that's all right.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Councillor Matthew McLaughlin from the Colne Valley Ward.
Councillor John Taylor from Kirkburton.
Councillor Tim Bamford from the Emmerdale Ward.
Yeah, Jodie Harris, Governance Officer.
Brilliant. And I think we've got a few apologies today from Hannah McKirker, Will Simpson and Jane Emery. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay, lovely. All right. Minutes of the previous meeting. I think John and Matthew, we're relying on you to...
I'll move them.
Excellent.
I shall second that.
Excellent. All right. So we agree they're a true record. Can I remind councillors that if there are any particular interests that they need to declare, that they do so and fill in the papers? Anybody got anything they want to declare now? No? Brilliant. Do we have... we are open to the public. We don't have any public here, but we are open to the public. Do we have any deputations or petitions?
None received, Chair, thank you.
Do we have any questions that have been submitted?
No questions received, thank you.
All right, we're cooking on gas then. So we're coming to our first agenda item or substantive agenda item, and that's the cumulative impact assessment. And I think, Russell, you're here to present. Do you want to introduce yourself, and do you mind going straight into the presentation, and then we'll obviously ask questions.
Thank you, Chair. Russell Williams, Operational Manager within the Public Protection Service. I've got oversight of the licensing team, school transport and the complex enforcement team as well.
Russell, would you mind introducing Kat as well?
Yes, and Catherine Armitage, Service Director for Environment and Climate Change, is online and dialed in. Okay.
Hi everyone.
Okay, thank you, councillors. So the purpose of this presentation and the report today is just to brief you on proposals to go out to consultation on introducing a community impact policy for both Huddersfield and Dewsbury town centres. A bit of background information to start with. So the council has a statement of licensing policy that's issued under the Licensing Act 2003. That's a statutory policy, we have to have one. The governance for that is that it's adopted by full council after going to Licensing and Safety Committee, which follows consultation. The existing statement of licensing policy was adopted in January 2020. Previous reviews of that policy have been light touch in nature and followed statutory guidance, and it's due for renewal in 2025, and we've started a programme of a more detailed review of that policy over the next 18 months or so, which links in with the blueprint to make it more robust and fit for purpose going forward with what the council wants for both Huddersfield and Dewsbury. So we're looking at a new policy coming into place towards the end of 2024, early 2025. As part of that initial work on the policy, we have looked at what's called a community impact assessment. A community impact assessment is a well-established concept under the Licensing Act. They've been in place since the Act coming into effect in 2005. The government saw the benefit of that and placed them on a statutory footing. But a community impact policy essentially is the potential impact of a concentrated number of premises, the impact that might have on the promotion of the licensing objectives, so crime and disorder, nuisance, prevention of protection of children from harm and public safety. But there's still no public health objective within the Licensing Act. Publishing a community impact assessment sets a strong statement for the council about its intent on how it's going to approach the licensing of its premises. The Licensing Act is permissive legislation. We are under a duty to grant a licence unless there are relevant representations that are received. those relevant representations can come from public, ward members, trade bodies, the police, environmental health. What a community of impact policy does is reverses that burden, so it places the onus on the applicant to demonstrate why that premises is needed and the steps that they intend to take to mitigate the risks that we've identified in the community of impact assessment. To introduce a community of impact assessment, you need evidence. We've been working with public health data intelligence officers who in turn have worked with West Yorkshire Police to look at the last 5 years' data around crime statistics, alcohol-related crime statistics, general crime statistics, and as you'll see in the report and the appendices, alcohol-related crime in both Huddersfield and Dewsbury town centres are above the Kirklees average. The data is kept under review by Public Health and shared with us as part of this process, and Public Health are also looking at different ways that that data can be used to help support ward members and the public in making representations against applications coming in. So having looked at evidence over the last 5 years, which obviously includes the COVID couple of years, 2.5 years, we feel that the evidence, given that the crime data is above the Kirklees average, that there is sufficient evidence to support going out to consult on whether we introduce a community of impact policy. The scope of a community of impact assessment can be quite restrictive, or it can be broad in its nature. It can apply to just off licences, on licences, late night refreshment after 11 p.m, or a mixture of those three. We're conscious of the blueprint. We don't want to stifle regeneration. We don't want to prevent good operators coming into the district to open new premises that support a family-friendly feel or good operators. We know from speaking with ward members and ward members coming to the licensing service that there are concerns over the number of off licences that are opening in the town centres, in particular the mini-mart type of operation. There are, I think there's 4 or 5 currently in Dewsbury Town Centre, another 4 in Huddersfield Town Centre, and we do get applications on a regular basis for them. So what we're proposing is that we go out to consultation, but we will limit the scope of the community of impact assessment to the off-licence trade and the mini-mart type of operation. Now, although we're concentrating on Huddersfield and Dewsbury Town Centre, we're aware that ward members may have concerns for their own districts. The nighttime economy and daytime economy in some of our districts is growing. So we are aware that members might want to consider one for their own areas, and as part of the wider policy review, we will work with more ward members in other areas to see if the evidence does support the introduction of a cumulative impact assessment in those areas. Like I said, that will be part of the wider policy review over the next 18 months or so. The evidence needs to be able to stand up to judicial scrutiny. The evidence for the Hood Town Centres is clearly there, and we feel it would stand up to judicial scrutiny. But like I said, we will work with members as part of the policy review. So the next steps, and I must apologise for the slide in the report, we were due to go to Licensing and Safety Committee on the 28th of June, but we had to rearrange that due to it falling on in the same time as Eid. So we've rearranged that for the 19th of July. So I was hoping to come to you today to say whether the Licensing and Safety Committee had approved consultation, but that's going to be later on in the year. Later on in July, 19th of July, that's due to take place. So if members of the Licensing and Safety Committee agree with officers, then we will go out to consult. That will be a 12-week consultation between towards the end of July. That will now start and run through till the end of September, and then we'll review those responses to the consultation between October and November, with a view to it going back to the Licensing and Safety Committee, who will then make a recommendation to full council. And like I say, the governance for the Licensing Act policy is that it's adopted by full council. So we are looking at January if we feel that a community of impact assessment is needed. We appreciate that bringing in a community of impact assessment isn't a quick process. There are issues being experienced now in both those areas, and as part of my role and the complex enforcement manager's role, we have looked at what other interventions that we can do. So we are looking at working across directorate with the Public Space Protection Order team to see what the council's current PSPOs look like and if there are any amendments that we can make to them to make them more robust. So for instance, the alcohol related PSPO, that's linked to ASB. Can we make any changes to that so it's more wider in scope to deal with other issues relating to alcohol that aren't ASB linked? The complex enforcement manager is working with premises to see if we can sign up to a voluntary agreement for high strength single cans and stop the sale of those. We're also looking at the evidence that's already out there to see if there's enough evidence to support a review of licences, and if there is, then we'll be liaising with responsible authorities and the licensing team on that. And we're looking at a multi-agency approach as well and working with charities, the Rough Sleeping team, to offer support to the street drinkers, but also an opportunity to look at the evidence that's out there and gather further evidence. And that's the end of my presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Russell. Catherine, do you want to add anything at this stage, or are you happy for us to go to questions?
Happy to go to questions, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think we're going to start, Matthew, at your side.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and thank you for the presentation and for the work that the teams have been putting into looking into this, because I think it is something that in the long term could make a big difference. But I did have quite a big problem with the report that we were presented with, because I think some mistakes were made in the data we were shown. So I'm looking at the Dewsbury Town Centre page, it's page 22 in our reports. On the map, we're showing area E010111130, but on the table, it's an area of Huddersfield Town Centre that ends 236. So we've not actually been given the data about Dewsbury Town Centre. And also the graphs that accompany each report. It would be nice to have some numbers on the y-axis so we can actually see what those bars mean. Because all we can tell really is what they are in relation to each other, which is useful, but not everything we need. And finally, on the table, everything that's blanked out in red is any value less than 50. And it would be quite useful to see what all of those numbers are, because, you know, some of them, looking at Huddersfield Town Centre robbery, it just says less than 50 on all 4 areas of robbery. And, okay, is that 2 or 3 incidents, or is it 49 and it only just didn't make the cut? So I think, could we have improvement in how this data is presented to us, please?
Certainly, Councillor, and please accept my apologies for those errors in the maps. I can recirculate those after the meeting if that wasn't shown clearly the areas that it is. In relation to the data that's marked in red, we'll speak to Public Health on that. It's Public Health that supplied this data in this format for us, not the maps. That's us that have taken them, so that I apologise for that. But I do know from speaking with Public Health, it's the reason they blank them out is because it's difficult to, the way they've presented the data, it's difficult when it's less than 50, but I appreciate having those numbers to do that comparison. So we'll speak to Public Health and get those actual figures, and again, I can circulate that after the meeting.
Thank you very much, I appreciate that. And also, just looking at the figures from Huddersfield Town Centre, we're given 4 areas. One of those areas, the one ending 107, which includes most of the town centre and out towards Leeds Road, is significantly worse in terms of total crime than the other areas. So I'm just asking about the boundaries of these assessments. Would they include only the areas we've been shown, or is there scope for it to be bigger or smaller? It's not quite clear where those lines would be drawn.
So the initial consultation will be on the boundaries that are shown, and the maps will be clearer for that when we do go out to consultation. Because we're consulting on that area doesn't mean we are stuck. We stick to that area. We'll continue to work with the police and Public Health and what the public and members may think about whether it needs to be widened, shortened or more restricted. That can all form part of the consultation that will take place should committee agree to that.
Thank you very much, Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Taylor?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Russell, for the report. I'm just going to continue on a bit of a theme, really, that The report itself, I'm actually quite disappointed with the standard of it. There are grammatical errors, there are errors in headings. It looks like a rushed report and nobody's actually sat down and read it start to finish. I do this in a lot of the committees I sit on. My dad was a printer and I used to proofread for him, so I will pick up these things. But it says to me, nobody's given due attention to this. And I think we need to register at the start of the year our expectation about the quality of the work that's brought through to this committee, and this, quite frankly, isn't good enough. Particularly, and I come back to the point you were just raising around the areas that are covered. The map doesn't even show the entirety of the areas that are covered, so we don't know how far that big one, E1010111107, we don't know how far it goes out. Does it go as far as the stadium? Does it not? I have no idea. So you're asking us to scrutinise information, but we don't have the information to scrutinise. So just a reflection that if we're going to bring reports, read them after you've produced it, make sure it's accurate, and, you know, our expectation is that we get a report that we can just pick up and look at and come forward with questions, not come forward with questions about the report feels inadequate. I've got two questions I want to ask. One, where the boundaries are drawn on this, it excludes Greenhead Park, but effectively comes up to Greenhead Park. It also only includes one side of Trinity Street adjacent to Greenhead Park. Now, I know, and I'm doing this from memory, but there are off licences on the side of the road you've included. On the other side of the road, you've got a number of restaurants and other places. My worry is if you exclude that other side of the road, you'll just get the mini-mart opening there. So I just think, you know, that these may be boundaries that are drawn for some other reason, but it doesn't feel like that would be the area you'd want to exclude for some reason. It just doesn't make sense to me. But my other question was around the public consultation. I've spoken in a number of scrutiny committees over the last couple of years about public consultation and my disappointment with how it's done. We seem to either do a consultation, which is an online consultation, and that's it, and we don't get very many responses, or we do a consultation where we go out to interested parties, which means we don't involve the public. So I'd like to understand a little more about what the consultation process is, who we're consulting, how we're doing it, what the approach is, what the target or the expectation is, because how do you know if it's been a successful consultation or not? Because if you only get a small number of responses, is that what you want? So have you set an expectation about what good looks like for that consultation? And if you haven't, are you going to do that? Because without that, we don't know whether it's a valid consultation or not. So I think I'll leave it at that, if I may, Chair.
Again, apologies for the content of the report, councillors. We will, like I said, look at the maps and recirculate the report after the meeting. We'll also double check the report that's going to committee to make sure that that's, you know, not the same errors haven't fed into that report. All I can do is apologise for that, and I take on board the comments that have been made on that. In relation to the areas around Greenhead Park and Trinity Street, that's certainly something we can look at and work with public health on that area and how it's defined and whether we can, you know, switch it to both sides of the streets to make sure that that's included. And like I say, as part of that consultation, if members or the public feel that it needs to be expanded, then that can be fed in and we can look at those boundaries as part of that consultation as well. How we will consult, we are duty bound to consult with the responsible authorities. We will also consult with ward members and the public. We haven't determined how that's going to be yet. We need to see if committee agree to that, and then we'll work with the council's consultation team on how best to achieve that and what we can expect to come back from that. We would like to see a high response, in particular from the public. The public are the ones that feel the effect, and businesses in those areas feel the impact of the issues that we're trying to address. So that's who would be likely to target, the public and the trade groups. as well as ward councillors. But we will be working with the council's consultation team on how best to carry out that consultation to get the maximum number of responses.
Do you mind if I just ask a quick follow-up on the ward members? I attend Safer Dewsbury, which I find a useful forum, and I'm not actually a Dewsbury ward member because that's covered with Dewsbury, so I'd be very grateful if you could include some of the surrounding areas because it is, after all, our residents that use these towns. So thanks very much.
Yeah, and just to echo that, I think again, it mentions the Newsom councillors, but I should imagine the Greenhead councillors have a fair amount to say about this as well, and potentially also Ashbrow, because it's moving over towards those wards. So you need to be a bit more inclusive about who's involved. Just two other comments. One, on the consultation, I would like to think we set ourselves an ambition of how many members of the public we're going to get to make it feel valid, because I mean there was a consultation done in Heckmondwike. Heckmondwike's got I don't know how many thousand people in it, and it was the place standard, and they tried to suggest it was a valid consultation, and they'd had response from 100 odd people. You know, it wasn't even statistically viable really. So we do need to start with all of our consultations, the council setting out an ambition about what we wish to achieve. And then just one, sorry Chair, just one other thought. Ravensthorpe and Batley feel like areas that have got lots of mini marts and areas. So have they been looked at to see whether they would meet this similar level of criteria? It's just a thought.
Let me bring Catherine in, and we'll come to that when I come to my question as well, John. Thank you. Catherine, you had your hand up.
I did. It was in response to Councillor Taylor's really good point about making sure that the consultations are representative. So when we work with the consultation team, one of the things that we'll make sure we ask them is what would be a statistically valid number of people to say that this is representative, because it's not just numbers, is it, either? It's representation across the board. So we'll make sure that we get a number that's deemed statistically valid, and then we'll aim to go above that, because you're quite right, we need to ensure that we get a broad range of representation in this. And as Russ also said, there's other people we have to consult with as well, so responsible authorities and businesses. So we'll make sure everybody's included, but we'll look at the overall population level, and then we'll check to see what will be statistically valid and target to ensure that we try and get above that, because it's a really good point, isn't it? And this is about people, isn't it, and people's lives. So we need to make sure that we've got adequate representation from them. So we will do that.
Brilliant, thank you. Tim, have you got questions you want to raise at this stage?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Russell, for your presentation. I'm just thinking, we've got an existing problem, and given that this is going to be new licences, will the existing licence be brought into that? You know, if there's no more licence coming forward, your CIA's not really going to do anything, is it? How do we enforce the licences that are there? Are we going to look into those, you know, going forward? Another one is, I'm just a bit of a query about the maps. They look quite complicated. How are they based? Are they based around areas of ASB, or is it through the number of licences? It just looks, you know, you've got little areas going to other areas. It just looks very complicated, that's all. Thank you.
I'll pick up on the maps first of all, and how they're determined and which areas were determined. So Public Health obtained the data from West Yorkshire Police on the crime stats. And what they've developed is, or in the process of developing, is a toolkit that puts all that data into a matrix that then rates different areas, and you can enter a postcode and it'll tell you where that postcode stands in relation to things like alcohol-specific hospital admissions, liver disease mortality, off-licence density, on-licence premises density, antisocial behaviour crimes, alcohol-related crimes, and for various other key targets. And then that throws out a weighted score, and that determines where the area is. Now, that model is based on national guidance from public health and toolkits that have been used by other local authorities, Leeds, Southampton, that have stood up to challenge, so it was a good model to follow. So when they've looked at the data, they've applied this model, and that's how those areas have been identified. You're right, it doesn't impact existing off licences. It does only apply to new ones, or if a premises applies for a variation, it'll apply to them. Part of the other interventions that we're looking at is around, is there sufficient evidence to look at existing licences and whether there is a review that can take place. If there is, then licences can be reviewed, and it will be down to members of the licensing panel to determine what happens with that licence if the evidence is there. And ultimately they can revoke a licence, and if that licence is revoked, then anybody applying for a new one in that premises would be subject to the CIA if it was introduced. But yeah, we need to do more work on existing ones. This is only to address new ones and reduce that concentration.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Russell. Just a couple from me, and I think you just started to touch on them. I was more interested to know more about the alcohol toolkit, and I think you've just covered that off. It's a shame we haven't got somebody from public health sat next to you to talk about that a little bit more, because I was going to talk in the same way that John was talking about where are the other areas that we need to be focusing on. I was actually going to talk about what are the other things that we could be focusing on, but you know, so for instance, you know that this is music to my ears that we're actually starting to look at something like this. But I just think as we get better at it as an organisation, perhaps we can start and look at things like all the fast food chains, all the vape stores, all those kind of things that we know that are really bad for public health, but we seem to have a plethora of them in some areas, for instance, the Ravensthorpe strip. Thank you very much for welcoming, referencing that. I personally would have liked to have seen some information about hospital admissions related to alcohol, or the kind of like longer term impact of alcohol, because I just think it adds to your story, so that when you're actually presenting to the licensing committee, you're not just saying this is crime, but we're actually saying this is damaging the residents that we've got in that area. Bear in mind, I am a Dewsbury councillor, so I know how unsafe it feels as a woman to walk across the town centre at night. I know I'm told that I don't need to worry, but it isn't a great feeling, I can assure you. And just to support the need for this, really, we've had some big events in Dewsbury. We had the Woven launch. Unfortunately, we got street drinking during that. We have the Christmas light turns on every year, and unfortunately we've got street drinking taking place then. And that's when the police and the council officers are out and about, and you know, people are asked to move on. On a Wednesday or a Saturday, it's a different. Tuesday afternoon, it's different. So sorry, a bit of a soapbox there. So anyway, I am very supportive. I'm probably going to, unless you want to say anything in relation to my comments, I'm probably going to go through the recommendations now. Oh, hang on, I'm not going to go through the recommendations yet.
All right, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just before we move on, I've just one or two more sort of comments to make. One is, I'm glad we're talking about potential other areas where one of these might be useful. I'm also thinking of somewhere like Holmfirth Town Centre, which actually has got quite a thriving young nightlife, surprisingly enough. And so when/if licensing do approve this process, could an email be sent out to all councillors just saying, here's what this is, if you think you might be representing an area where one of these could be useful, because we can't trust them to read every report of every committee, because not even the best of us does that. And also, just I wondered if you could elaborate a little bit on some of the other interventions that are listed in our report, because Some of them are very important, and I understand that you won't have all the detail for all of them because it's multi-agency, and so it should be. But I'm thinking in particular, like under the multi-agency approach headline, you've got use the opportunity to gather evidence as to which shops are selling alcohol to street drinkers. It's like, with a view to what? And just before you answer, take the opportunity to say, because we're on the record out there, something that our local neighbourhood policing team always tell us to tell the public, which is always report it. Even if you don't think it'll do any good, even if you think it's something that's already happened, therefore what can be done about it, always report it, because the more data we have and agencies have, the better our responses can be and the more likely it is to present a cumulative effect and therefore warrant more attention. So always report it.
Yeah, certainly we'll email all ward councillors as part of the consultation on these specific areas, but certainly we can expand on that and invite councillors to approach us if they feel that they would like an area included. We can certainly do that. In relation to the other interventions, you've just hit on a key point there. From a licensing point of view, that data is essential if we're going to look at reviewing licences. And part of the work with the charities and the multi-agency side is about officers gathering evidence, but it also helps if the public do report it to the police, because then the police can give us more information on how many reports they've had, and it all builds that picture. And that will support even more a need for a cumulative impact assessment. But if that evidence can identify individual shops, which is what we're looking at, then we can take action against those individual shops. The Licensing Act's quite difficult to take action against individual shops. It has to be evidence-based for the committee, for the panel to be able to take action. So it needs that public support in reporting. It needs the police to be able to identify those premises. It needs officers to be out on the streets looking and talking to people to get that evidence that it's this shop, it's that shop, it's these shops, and then the licensing service can look to review, or the police can look to review a licence that's already in place, and that's the idea behind that one.
Okay, John.
It's a quick one, actually. It's back on the consultation process. I'm guessing as we're going to committee slightly later than you planned to, the consultation timeframe will move slightly as well. Because my concern when I thought about it, July to September, in Huddersfield, one of the biggest populations in Huddersfield are students, and they'll probably not be there for most of that time. So just bear in mind that because they'll have a view on some of this. They may actually be part of the problem even, but who knows? But just we need to make sure that the consultation period will pick up when the students are in town. Yeah, that's it, Chair, sorry.
Thank you, good point.
Yeah, certainly. We'll look at that. The consultation period, there was always a bit of flex in that, so we can certainly look to push that back so they are including the students when they return.
Okay, all right. So I'll ask the panel to assist me in making sure that we've got the recommendations. So first recommendation is that we review the data, especially the Dewsbury Town Centre data that we feel is not correct, and then you're going to send that back out to the panel so that we can have a look at that. Second one's pretty similar. It's around the maps, which we've got A, that they're complicated, and B, that we don't know exactly where the lines are drawn. So I think you were going to review with Public Health the maps, and that would be really helpful for us. I think the third one is around just reviewing the report again to make sure that if you've got that extra time to go to licensing, that it can be at a different level of quality for that. You were going to review some areas where potentially off licences might move just across the road, going to review that with Public Health and talk to them about things like that. Trinity Street was mentioned, but there might be other areas, and I haven't looked at detail, the Dewsbury detail in the same way John managed to look at the Huddersfield detail, so that's good. We're looking to see whether or not there can be a recommendation about a representative number of people from the public that so that we get that broad range, and we've got a target around that engagement and consultation, so it really feels as though it's meaningful consultations. So we'll perhaps wait to hear back around what the outcome of that is. If you wouldn't mind letting us know, that would be really helpful. And we would be interested, I think, in understanding for those licences that are being reviewed, what the actual potential is for licensing to then say no. We're actually at a stage where we're saturated with off licences selling cheap alcohol in this area, and you've not evidenced good practice, so that we'd be interested to see that. Going to let councillors know once this is approved, so hopefully we'll make sure that we're looking at all the other areas, and hopefully that'll come out with the toolkit, so that we can actually see what areas we need to worry about in our own patches. And I think that's it, unless... Oh, hang on, I've missed one.
No, you haven't missed one, Chair. It's just an addition. I wonder if we could consider coming back to scrutiny once the consultation is done, the report's written, so that we can have another go at it, and we can have a look at it going in, have a look at it going out before it gets sent on to licensing and then to full council. I wonder if that would be possible.
We might be able to consider that, or it may not necessarily be a full meeting that we do it. We might have to do it either informally or through some kind of paper exercise. Kat, you come in.
Yeah, we can come back. I think scrutiny's, as you said, the dates for scrutiny might mean we'd have to do it informally or through a paper exercise if we were going to meet the same timelines, so as not to delay the process. But we can certainly come back once we've consulted and let you know what the results are.
Thank you. On that note, then, I'm going to say thank you very much, Russell, for taking the questions, and thank you very much, Catherine, for presenting it. It was a good paper, so good thing to do. Okay, we're just going to take a very short break now, just so that we can swap presentations. Okay, thank you. Okay, all right. Can we move nicely on to the next agenda item, please? And I think, Guy, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, you're covering the White Rose Forest summary review. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my name is Guy Thompson. I'm the Programme Director for the White Rose Forest. So I'm employed by Kirklees Council as the accountable body, but the project covers North and West Yorkshire. I've been asked to come here by Edward Highfield, and he asked if we could just put a short 90-second film together to summarise some of the achievements from last year. I did have all that set up. Okay,
You go
so
for
I've
it.
just got a few slides. Look under the bonnet from what happened last year, so you get a full appreciation of what's been done. Got you. Okay. Right, first of all, I'd just like to sort of helicopter out and make sure the committee get a full appreciation of the national context. So on the left, you'll see the whole list of England's community forests. There's 13 of us in all. The two areas I want you to look at are the two highlighted figures. The first one is to see the amount of hectares planted within the White Rose Forest, which is 329. As I say, that's the largest we've done for whatever, actually. But the important point is it's such a significant part of the national picture. The total planted by the whole network was 1,000 hectares. That figure of 1,000 hectares would have been sent to the Minister as a contribution to the national tree planting target, which is quite an important priority. Just want to say that the England's Community Forest Network cover 20% of England's land cover, yet we plant that 1,000 hectare figure is actually more than the Forestry Commission, for example, which covers all of England. So it's actually quite an outstanding kind of achievement. And it has been noted, and we are flying high, as it were, inside DEFRA in terms of our ability to deliver. So just 4 points I wanted to sort of summarise. The first one I've just mentioned, that we're punching above our weight in terms of delivering England's new woodland creation targets. First one to get over 1,000 hectares. So that means that the White Rose Forest is essential to that delivery, but also it's beginning to get a national profile with a growing reputation. So I think that's something that Kirklees obviously need to be aware of. Just to step back and just remember that we're the third year into a 5-year programme. So we literally started this from a standing start. 3 years ago, effectively I was on my own with a programme manager. But since that time, we've created across North and West Yorkshire 805 hectares of new woodland. That's including, in addition to planting, 1,600 standard trees across our towns and cities. Through Kirklees, we've invested £6.7 million with landowners across North and West Yorkshire. But these new woodlands are starting to have an impact in terms of changing our culture and our landscape. So just a couple of stats for you. The trees we've planted so far will mean that 30,000 households will have more access to local woodlands across the White Rose Forest. And our key resource in terms of biodiversity for woodland is obviously our ancient woodland. And we've planted 235 hectares of new woodland, which effectively protect and buffer that ancient woodland, protecting its biodiversity value. The fourth point I want to note is that our USP in delivering woodland is called the White Rose Forest Delivery Pathway, and it's serviced by a Kirklees-led team, which we've recruited in the last 2 or 3 years, the White Rose Forest core team. I would say they're very capable, very ambitious, and their presence, if you like, across the national network is being felt. So I just want to show a few slides. It's getting into the weeds a little bit, but it's still, I think it's quite important for you to understand how it shapes our work. The slide on the table on the left is about number of projects and compared to their size. So the blue are the smallest projects, less than an acre, and there's 60 projects there. The really big projects on the right of the orange are over 10 hectares, and there's less than 10 of those. Now those are the numbers of projects and their size. If you then look at those in terms of hectareage, which is what DEFRA are interested in, it shows that virtually a vast majority of our delivery is done by those 10 projects that are over 10 hectares. And so the 60 projects that are really small actually only deliver a handful of hectares when you add them all together. So there's a tension here. One, we've got to make sure that we deliver a large amount of hectares for DEFRA, but at the same time we've got to remember we're a community forest, which means we've got to do lots of small projects around where people live. Just give a quick league table on areas where they've been planting in the different districts. Leeds came up with the most projects, but North Yorkshire came up with actually the larger number of new woodlands, which is not surprising considering the geography. Kirklees came in at a respectable third. So the columns in green are the last 3 years of delivery. The one in the second year is slightly down because at the last minute we lost it to another funding stream, but the delivery was counted to DEFRA. So as you can see, there's a steady improvement. Just to remind ourselves that actually in the next 2 years we've got to deliver over 1,200 hectares. So next year, this is next November to March, we've actually got to double what we've just done last year. We've got to go over 600 and then repeat that the year after. That's as if we're to hit our Trees for Climate targets. This is just White Rose Forest here. Bit of good news. The blue areas on the left-hand table there are our pipeline as of last year that we delivered. The orange is what we've currently got ready for the next 2 years. So you can see there's a massive amount of projects that are entering the pipeline, so that gives us confidence that we've got the areas to plant. The next part is the status, which shows that already we've got over 400 hectares in agreement, and there's hundreds of hectares that are being designed and go through the regulatory process. It's worth knowing that once a landowner is interested in planting trees, it takes up to 2, sometimes 3 years before you get actual permissions to do the planting. So the pipeline status is actually very important to understand where we are in the process. So at this stage, I'd say we were reasonably confident we should hit our targets in the next 2 years. So just a couple of other highlights. Quite a big one, really. We know now that we have capital and revenue secured till March 2025. And we also know that DEFRA at a very senior level have submitted a bid to the DEFRA Investment Committee to look to try and extend that to March 2026. So we're a bridge between this funding period and the next. I would say that because we hit those 1,000 hectares, that DEFRA have invited us to write a submission for the comprehensive spending review, which we're working on in the next couple of months, and that basically to set up how we see the England's community forest going forward post 2025. Also want to highlight as well that we've been told by government that we're going to start having to look at green finance in more detail, so it's not 100% public. So we're looking at trying to develop a blended approach, and that's something we'll be looking at in more detail in the next few months, particularly around the Northern Forest. Also to say, it's an important point that after 23 years, we're finally changing our governance from a joint venture agreement to a legal agreement called the White Rose Forest Agreement. So we're in this current transition year. Basically, this is to reflect the size of the project, the amount of money that's going through it, and the political importance. So essentially, we've created a high-level strategic board, which has fewer signatories on it, but they are the core statutory authorities, the combined authorities in the national parks. And the challenge for us is to make sure that we can do that while making sure that we're locked into our community roots and get the local community, those who want to be a part of it, can have access to the resources and training to help deliver. And we do that through a partnership forum. I think this is the last slide of any detail. Essentially, all the England's community forests are having to revise their strategic plans. So we will hopefully have a 25-year plan covering North and West Yorkshire from the 2025 to 2050. So that process is underway of working out what we want in that plan. It will include our vision, our targets and ambitions for woodland creation and management across North and West Yorkshire. Essentially, the plan will be linked to a whole number of agendas, but essentially I would prioritise the biodiversity, climate resilience and community mental health and job skills. These plans have to be relevant locally, they have to be relevant to national parks, they have to be linked into national drivers and ambitions as well. So I can say we've literally just hired somebody to do that, a very capable gentleman, starting in the next week or two. We'll be working in earnest with the team to create this plan, and we're aiming to have it launched on the 1st of August, so obviously Yorkshire Day 2025, which will be exactly 25 years since the first one was launched in Bradford. So we've got our work cut out there, but that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Guy. Quick tour through what seems to be a huge amount of work, quite impressive. Right, I'm going to come to Tim first, I think, to ask any questions if you've got any.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that, Guy. I just wonder how you measure success with the forest. Is it trees planted, or is it the trees that actually survive? Because we've got a project by us in Skelmanthorpe where 3,000 trees were planted, and I walked it the other day and counted 7 that had actually survived. I just wondered how you gauge the value for money of what we're putting into this and what we're getting back out of it. I think it's just a case of they weren't maintained or protected. So, if you could just explain a bit on that, please.
Yeah, sure. So for all the projects that go for Trees for Climate, it goes through the Kirklees as the accountable body. Once the scheme's been designed, which is suitable for the landowner's needs and the site context and what it's designed to do, there's then a 15-year contract. And that also spells out the amount of maintenance and beat-up funding that's required, fence repair and all the rest of it. And there's a little bit of flexibility in that as the time goes on. But essentially, Kirklees, on behalf of DEFRA, are buying a 15-year-old woodland. So up until that point, if the trees aren't successful or the plan isn't being stuck to, there's a legal redress to go back to the landowner and say, this is the design, this is what you said you do, this is the money we've given you, please rectify it. So what we found in the last couple of years, there have been a couple of droughts where you've had rain at the wrong time, or maybe even the wrong kind of rain, I don't know. But essentially, you want to make sure that the very first year of trees, there's plenty of moisture in the ground, and we haven't had that. So there have been sites where there's failure. So we do beat up. So in the first 3 years, we have an establishment pot of money specific to each site. So the landowner can access that. So I would see it not as planting, it's a 15-year programme for each site.
Do not address that then, Tim. Do you know who owned that site, or?
It's the Parkgate project in Skelmanthorpe. It was done through Denbydale Parish Council.
Can I move on to you then, John?
Yeah. I'd like to ask a question that relates to the video that you showed us, because it makes mention of green streets. I'd like to know a little bit more about green streets and how many green streets we have in Kirklees, or we have ambition for in Kirklees. So Kirklees specifically, rather than the whole of Western North Yorkshire.
Okay, so we have 2 planting programmes, Landscapes for Water, and then, as you say, Green Streets. Green Streets is targeting areas of priority communities, areas of jobs growth, and the key routes network that link them. And that's an approach across West and North Yorkshire. So essentially, the schemes that we deal with are based on what the landowners come up with. So my understanding is that we are supporting, if you want to know specifically about Kirklees, that Kirklees are doing some mapping to look at its transport routes and identifying opportunities for either tree planting or woodland creation. If you need the details specifically for Kirklees, what's on the pipeline for those areas inside the Green Streets priority zones, I can get that for you, but I obviously haven't brought that with me now.
Thank you. I think this is the scrutiny panel for Kirklees, so we're actually focused on Kirklees rather than the whole of the White Rose Forest. So it would be very, very helpful to have that information that relates to Kirklees, please, if we may.
We can get that data afterwards, as you've said, so that's great. Right, Matthew, would you like to ask some questions?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and if you're wondering why they're all grinning like Cheshire Cats, it's because I'm colloquially known as the tree guy on the council. I'm a member of the Colne Valley Tree Society, who I know you know, and I'm the reason you're here. So I've been told to be restrained, and I will be restrained, but basically the theme that keeps coming up is what Tim touched on, which is survivability of a lot of these trees and a lot of these sites. I know that on a number of sites and on the volunteer training day that you ran last year, guards were not put on the trees, the plastic tube guards. And I'm wondering how widespread that practice is across the project, because in my experience, if trees aren't guarded properly, then rabbit, sheep or deer, particularly deer, will come and eat the lot. And you might as well have not put them in the ground if they're not going to be even initially protected from that first moment. So I wondered what I'm hoping you're going to say. That's a silly question. Of course we do. Maybe there's one or two bad projects out there that didn't. And then my next question before I shut up, because I won't give you them all at once because it'd be impossible. But it's about land ownership. And who owns the land that these trees are being put on? I know it's going to be an extremely diverse range of people, but I'm wondering how much of the project is vulnerable to a private landowner selling the land or inheriting the land and basically changing their mind about hosting the project, or how much of it is people like Yorkshire Water, I know, and who are big old landowners who are long-term partners, or even local authorities who are committed and we can rely on to actually do the job to maintain these forests long-term.
Okay. So guards. Essentially, once we understand what the landowner wants, what the site determines what we should and shouldn't plant and what the purposes of the woodland are, one of our foresters will work out the design. And it's all about making sure the trees become independent in the landscape. Okay, and there's lots of ways of doing that. We're not wedded to guards or not wedded to guards. We'll do whatever works. Okay, and that might mean species selection, the weeding regime, whether you have a fence or not, whether you have deer fencing or not, what kind of guards you have, whether you say you protect your trees by shooting the deer, for example. It's all down to the landowner and the situation. Generally speaking, most of the sites have guards on, except for two reasons. One is the local authority sites, particularly in Leeds, they found that if you do that, it just attracts vandalism. So what they'll do, they'll increase the number of trees planted and expect some losses, so you get the density of planting eventually. And the other one would be for our largest site we started planting this year is at Snays Home, which is a large catchment site in North Yorkshire, bought and owned by the Woodland Trust, and they wanted to be plastic-free, as it were. So they've chosen not to put plastic guards on and accepted the fact there will be predation losses on those trees. So they are taking a bit of a risk, but they've signed the dotted line. So they would be expected to beat up and replace any losses. Tree planting is working with nature. Sometimes trees get diseases, there's the weather, there's a variety of changes that can occur that you can't predict. And then you don't know the impact of predation until you actually do it. So certainly me and my team, Foresters team, we're pragmatic and we want to reduce risk. And we've got the money to do it, but obviously if a landowner doesn't want guards, we'll say, okay, we'll have to find another way of doing it. So it's site by site. Is that okay? Land ownership. Again, if I can come up with those stats, we can break them down. Most of the schemes in the last 2 or 3 years have been local authorities, which is great because it's responding to the political drivers. The next major grouping are large estates. So that includes kind of utilities like Yorkshire Water, but Yorkshire Water's land are in the catchment and there are lots of design issues like breeding waders and peat. So it's taken up to 3 or 4 years to get permissions for significant tree planting in Yorkshire Water areas, just because of the nature of the regulatory process and design. But then you've got the larger estates like Broughton Hall, for example, and there are a number of others we're working on. So that we're going through those, if you like. They're larger schemes. So we don't expect their land ownership to change in a short time. And then bit by bit, we're then now working with the next group, if you like, are tenant farmers. So in order for us to put any investment on that land, we have to have the permission of the landowner agreement there. So again, we wouldn't expect to see a large amount of losses through change of land ownership. I have to be honest, I'm not entirely sure, and I can check for you, whether or not it's our contract between Kirklees and the landowner specifies it's got a covenant's got to be made. In other words, they pass it on to the new landowner. they take on the burden, not the burden, the opportunity of delivering those 15-year trees. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's public money, and we take our designs quite seriously, so there will be long-term benefit. But yeah.
No, thank you very much. And so you're putting a lot of onus back onto the landowner, which I suppose is responsible. Is right, because they're going to be there every day, and if anybody's going to do long-term maintenance, it is the person who's responsible. So I'm wondering if they're given best practice guidance written, you know, you can tell them what's best, but are they given like, here's how best we reckon to maintain land, so that, because not everybody's experienced tree planters like the Corn Valley Tree Society are they helped as much as possible to know what to do and for how long and when they need to go back to protect these trees? And also, given that that's where the primary responsibility seems to be on the individual landowner, to maintain these sites, and obviously we potentially have an example of one at Skill and Thorpe which has not been a success, how confident are you that the numbers, these hectares of woodlands we're planting, are going to survive? How confident can we be that putting them in the ground is actually creating woodland in 50 years' time?
Okay, so in terms of the whole thing about the White Rose Forest delivery pathway, is it's a bespoke process. So we look at working with the landowners and understand their situation. Some of them have from forestry agents. Some of them have their own landowner teams, like local authorities have. So we assess the needs of the landowner. Some landowners just say, look, here's some land, I don't know what to do with it, I'm not doing any farming anymore, go and plant it, and they'll walk away and just sign the thing when we're ready. Or other ones will want to know exactly what's going where. So we have to shape our responses to their needs. And they're provided with any training that they require. But essentially what we prefer is them to have like a White Rose Forest partner, so they can access that ongoing. Because they've got the obligation to deliver those trees at 15 years. So there are key points. One is getting the trees established in the ground. Then you've got to remove the guards, and then you might have to do a bit of pruning and stuff like that. And all the way through replacing losses. So the idea is that we go back every 5 years and renew the contract with them to say, okay, we've given you money, we've got a 15-year contract, we've given you money for the first 5, we'll come back in year 5 and assess what you need for year 6 to 10, because it might change. We don't know exactly how it's going to go because it's working with nature. So it's a very bespoke process, but we're not about saying, oh, plant some trees and walk away. What the confidence, assuming that things stay pretty much as they are, and there's no dramatic, you know, like a polarity shift or something, I'm pretty sure that the schemes we've planted will grow. Part of the due diligence for any sites is making sure it hasn't got planning permission, that the land is ideal. It's low, what we call low risk, so it's not high agricultural quality. It's not going to be planted, built on. So we do choose our sites very carefully. If it's got high quality biodiversity, we don't plant in it. So we do select our schemes, and we've got to make sure that the landowner, that's what they want. And they're not funding driven, they're function driven. So as best as I can see now, I would say pretty good.
No, that's wonderful to hear. Thank you for the reassurance. I do have more, but I'm conscious that there are other members of the panel. So if anybody, you know, I'll show up for the minute.
To be fair, I don't have much. I was going to ask about the relationship in Kirklees with parks and open spaces, in particular. And again, it's a similar theme. It's around young saplings that potentially haven't survived due to moisture or guarding or whatever, and what the plan was. But you can answer that.
Yeah, so I mean, this goes back to the previous question. So essentially, I work in major project service, and my team has this accountable body core team function that covers North and West Yorkshire. So when we deal with Kirklees Council in terms of planting trees on its own land, it's like we are dealing with Leeds or Bradford or Halifax or anybody else. So we are separate from the Parks and Countryside function. We're a different employer. We have a different role entirely. So that's why if I had been, say, Joe Robertson, I would have had all those figures about what's going on Kirklees land, but I was here to be brought here as an accountable body function. I mean, we can go and get that information if you want, but you best go to the landowner, which is Kirklees.
Okay, that's really helpful. And can I just double check? So we've had a lot of really good information about certainly years 3, and you're on to year 4 now, are you? And again, then it's just at year 5 that you go back and you check with the landowner what the actual status is with regards to what's taken and what's not taken, and whether or not you're moving on to the next stage.
All right. So once a contract is started, year 0, if you like, there's a 15-year contract. So what I've showed you was actually the programme years 1 to 5. But so something in November might start. It's this year 4 of the programme. We have a contract with the landowner, say Woodland Trust at Snaysholme. It'd be a 15-year contract.
I think I understood that, Guy. It's when you do your first check to make sure that they are on schedule. Is that year 5?
I would say we have to provide evidence to our funders that the trees are in the ground. So there have to be geotag photographs at the end of the planting season. Okay, so that's the first thing to see whether they've done what they said they would do. It depends, but basically the official going back would be after 5 years to see whether the trees are taken. Now, we would expect, if the trees weren't working well, we'd expect the landowner to contact us and say, look, I need some advice, or we've had a number of them do that because there was a drought last year at the wrong time. I mean, droughts come and go, rain comes and goes, but if it's the wrong time of year, it can be tricky for establishing new trees. So one local authority contacted us and said we've had a lot of losses. Because lots of local authorities said that, not just our project across the country. We went back to DEFRA and they've given us some money to replace those losses because of the drought. So the pressure we feel, not just delivering for members of the public and the landowners, most of the pressure actually comes from government. Very politically driven.
Should we let you have another couple, Matthew, and then we'll go for...
All right, thank you, Chair. No, I am increasingly reassured hearing what it is you've got to say, which is fantastic. My next question was about something you've already touched on, which is the biodiversity of species planted. And I know that it's a really important part of making these woodlands not just carbon capture machines, but actually part of the habitat, because there have been projects many years ago in other parts of the country where local authorities have said, we're going to plant some trees, and they just planted rows of conifers and killed everything else that was there. So what kind of targets do you have in terms of species diversity and native, non-native species, that kind of thing? My second question was a bit parochial, so excuse me, Chair, but we had a problem, not this season, last season, in the Tree Society, and I'm sure it's a problem that's shared by a lot of other tree planting community groups, which was when the regulations changed, because obviously the government regulated when these projects started so that land had to be properly assessed before it could be planted on for extremely good reasons. But that really scuppered us because we'd got to the point where we were planting 6,000 trees a year, just about, but we didn't have the resources to survey our own land and to get it approved according to the new regulations, because we're only a sort of voluntary group. And I was wondering if there is scope, forgive me if this is already happening, the scope for your team and the council's team perhaps, who have that ability to survey land, to work with community groups all over West Yorkshire to help, because we've got landowners saying we want you to plant. The difficulty is we were getting our trees free from the Woodland Trust, but if you're getting your trees from the taxpayer, you have to obey the regulations, which we couldn't do. So I'm wondering if there's scope for the White Rose Forest team to use its kind of resources, I know they're stretched, to help community groups assess sites so that we can plant as many as we want to plant. Because instead, for the last 2 seasons, instead of planting 6,000, we've only been able to plant 2,000, because that was the amount of land we had, and all in one place, Scamondon Reservoir. So on behalf of them, is there anything you can do to help?
Okay, native species. So that's the native broadleaf are the default position for species chosen. In North and West Yorkshire, there's about 18,000 hectares of ancient woodland. That's woodland that's been there in that location in some form or another since 1600 AD. Obviously a finite resource. You can't expand an ancient woodland. Obviously it's there. but you can buffer it, you can plant around it to protect it, so that the species within it, and I'm not just talking the ones above ground, like birds and moths and bluebells, but like the mycelium, particularly the soil health, can spread out. So we're doing some work with the forest research to look at areas in North and West Yorkshire where if we were to plant, we'd be able to link up the key corridor, biodiversity corridors, into, which are suited to trees and woodlands and their associated habitats. So that targeting, and therefore that result in increased incentives for landowners to want to go into woodland, because we say, well, that if you're linking two ancient woodland areas together, that's really worth it. You get a big biodiversity bang for your buck, as it were. However, having said all that, forestry is pragmatic. You know, what does the landowner want? They may think it's a long-term thing, so it's not about what you're going to do in the next 10 years or 20, it's actually what you're going to do over the next 40, 50, 60, up to 100 years. So it'd be perfectly okay, for example, on some difficult sites where you might want to have a screen, so you might plant some non-native trees that grow quicker. If your driver is carbon, you'd go for the non-native trees, and that particularly in terms of income. So you might do it where you plant non-native trees initially, and then that creates the space or the little niche for the non-natives, which are slower to catch up. And so you take out, you'll select against the non-native trees when you do your first thinning, and that leaves the native woodland behind. So it's all about design and working what you're looking for over the next few decades. But yeah, the default position is native broadleaves. We'll go throw in as well. We did a survey to look at all our ancient woodlands and some of our veteran trees where we had good landowner relations. We then went and collected through a variety of community groups about 100,000 acorns. So these are real prime genetic stock from Yorkshire's ancient trees. Taken those to the Leeds Arium, and I believe about 80,000 have germinated. So they'll be ready to plant out in about 2 or 3 years' time. And we're obviously that could then help make more resilient the woodland element. So there has been a danger. We're a community forest, that's where we started, but as we're now becoming a woodland creation partnership where you've got loads of money, loads of political drivers, and government have increased the regulatory hurdles. So you therefore need a bigger team to try and get schemes into delivery over the approvals process, and that requires a huge amount of work. And there has been a danger that the smaller community groups are basically being left out in the sense they haven't got the capability to deal with peat surveys and why, you know, and so therefore can they deal with all the amount of money and the regulatory process. So we're very conscious of that and have been. First of all, we've got to establish and make sure we get our programme going so we can fulfil Kirklees contracts to DEFRA, etc. But we've set up a number of things for community groups. One of the things is to be able to pay them to run events called 1,000 Tree Challenge events. The other one is we have offered bespoke training to each community group so they can understand the delivery pathway in the way they need to understand it. And I think the Colne Valley Tree Society have been on that. And we've said through the partnership forum if they have any particular needs, we'll set up one-to-one sessions so we can work out what their training needs are or resource needs are. The other thing we've set up is a planning grant for community groups. So if they've got a good relationship with the landowner, but they might need to spend resource or buy some resource to do the design work, they can capture that money, so it helps them get into the planning of it. But yes, it's true. Especially as the marginal farmland is often on the moorland fringe, and that becomes a greater amount of bird interest, peat interest, and maybe even landscape interest. So the greater demand for land comes from the moorland fringe, but that's where it's most difficult to plant. And that's why we've got a lot of resources in our core team to help through a design process to get through that. So I'm hoping that a lot of work has gone into the uplands of the Calder catchment on Yorkshire Water and National Trust land, some of which is in Kirklees. We're hoping that a major scheme is going to be given approval in the next few weeks.
Is it just a short supplementary? I'm just going to say thank you. Well, that's fine. You may say thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I am going to draw that to a close now, Guy. Thank you very much for your obviously very detailed knowledge around what you're doing, and you sound like you're doing an absolutely fantastic job. I just want to sum up any recommendations that we've got. I'm just looking to the panel to make sure that I've got them. I think it really is more around us being able to access that Kirklees level of data, if you wouldn't mind accessing that for us around the green streets in particular. I think most of the other questions you've actually answered while you've been here, unless anybody else has got anything they want to add. No?
No, just I think it might be useful to find out who we should speak to at a Kirklees level, who's responsible.
I think, did you mention Joe? Guy, who were you directing us to?
Yes, so the person, the lead officer that we work with on Kirklees schemes will be Joe Robertson.
Yeah, because it seemed like a lot of our questions were about long-term maintenance, and you've made clear, Guy, that that's really a question we need to be asking ourselves, the Kirklees Council, which potentially is a topic for a future meeting at some point.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. And we'll be able to add discussion around trees in Kirklees to our work plan. Guy, with you pack up around us, we're just going to move on to the work plan, and then we can make sure that we've covered that. So, panel, in front of us, we have a draft work plan, or version 1 of the work plan. I think one of our co-optees is wrong actually on there, Jodie. It does feel as though we're at the very beginning of the year, and we want to make sure, well, we are, thank you, want to make sure that we've got a little bit of a waiting list or a list attached to this, so that we know what we've got in sight and we can pull things forward. Today, probably we could have managed 3 items if we'd have known. There is some potential about August changing round. The environmental sustainability strategy may not be appropriate to bring in August. So, with your approval, if I speak to officers, can I move that round?
Yeah.
Yeah. And as a first suggestion, if that's the case, should we try to go from the winter maintenance update in August? So that's the first suggestion. The only other thing, apart from adding a schedule to the end, so we'll have a kind of like a waiting list of things that are coming, a schedule about when things are actually going to hit, and then you've got good knowledge about when things are going to hit, even if we do have to move them around. The only other thing that I'd like us to consider are any particular golden threads that we always want to check are covered in each of the meetings, or at least that we go back to in each of the agenda items that we've got. Yeah.
Well, on the golden thread, I think we could pick up the title of the scrutiny panel, perhaps. But I was also going to ask whether it's possible that we regularly look at the forward plan. So the council produces a forward plan that tells us of decisions that are coming forward. So it might help us in terms of having some early sight of things where we need to do some pre-scrutiny on, which might be useful as well.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. So obviously there's a link to the forward plan that we can make sure that everybody on the committee's got, and perhaps we can have that as a pre-meet, informal meet discussion, and try and remember to put that on. Is there anything else relating to the work plan?
Yeah, no, just picking up on what John said about the sort of the name of the committee. It is standard in every report, item 3.4, that climate change and air quality is one of the things that, you know, alongside working with people, working with partners, financial implications, is supposed to be part of every report, but very often there's not much there, if anything, and just kind of constantly encouraging every report that is written to give proper consideration to climate impact and air quality impact. And because I said this in the pre-meeting, that we often say when the topic comes up, it needs to be written through everything that the council does. Every single thing needs to be thinking, how can we reduce carbon? How can we make this greener? It's not a separate thing. It's not a separate project. It's not something that can stand on its own. It's something that has to bleed into everything. And we've built it into every single report that comes to Cabinet and licensing and planning and full council. But I'm not sure how seriously it's taken when a lot of these reports are written, so that would be nice to see.
I think it's a really good point, Matthew. Thank you. And I think if this committee can't hold people to account on that, then yeah, it doesn't bode well for others. Okay. If we're content that we'll bring version 2 to the next meeting, I'll close the meeting unless anybody's got anything else they want to say. Okay. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you.